I'd like to introduce you to the two letters that are on show next to this screen. They're two very different letters, one by a 17-year-old student from Glasgow, name of John Wilson, and the reply from Wordsworth, who was then 32 and living in Dove Cottage. You can see Wilson's portrait behind this screen. As you can see, he was a gentleman and a sportsman, and he too became a writer in time. In fact, he moved to the Lake District a few years later, and Wordsworth and Wilson became good friends. But Wilson's letter was a letter of admiration and, as Dorothy said, a letter of compliment and criticism. It arrived on the 31st of May 1802, and it was one of the earliest letters of compliment to Wordsworth, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why it survived. Wilson was complimentary about Wordsworth's first collection of poems. These were the lyrical ballads, published first in 1798, then in 1800, and such was Wilson's admiration for them that he said that he valued them next to his Bible, which was praise indeed. But as Dorothy noted in her journal, it was a letter of criticism as well as compliment, and it was this subject that Wordsworth really responded to. What Wilson complained about was the subject that Wordsworth chose for some of the poems, and there was one in particular, a poem called The Idiot Boy, that he objected to. And the poem, put simply, describes the story of a boy with what we would call learning difficulties and the love that his mother has for him. And the word idiot boy is perhaps a phrase that we would have difficulty with nowadays. We might find it offensive, but we must remember that at that time the word had a different and perhaps more clinical meaning. So Wilson objects to this poem on three grounds really. One is that it doesn't give pleasure. For Wilson and his peers, that was a key part really of poetry, that it should give pleasure, it should evoke sympathies, and its subject should be of interest. And as far as Wilson was concerned, The Idiot Boy failed on all three counts. So Wordsworth's reply is a strong reply, and his three main arguments are as follows. Firstly, that the reason that Wilson finds it a dull subject, the wrong subject, is because it's sort of outside his belief of what poetry should be about. For Wilson and the poetry conventions of the time, subjects of poetry didn't include, as Wordsworth points out, people like shepherds or subjects that might be considered indelicate. So Wordsworth argues that the new poetry ought to embody a much wider subject. And in the letter, he makes a very strong point. People in our rank in life are perpetually falling into one sad mistake, namely that of supposing that human nature and the persons they associate with are one and the same thing. So Wordsworth saying to Wilson that he should look perhaps beyond the normal conventions and experience. The second argument of Wordsworth, he's very pleased when Wilson says to him, compliments him, how Wordsworth's poetry reflects feelings. But Wordsworth makes the point really that the poet's role, particularly in his view, should go beyond reflecting feelings, but should give people new composition of feelings. And he makes the point again, the poet ought to travel before men occasionally, as well as at their sides. And then the third point that Wordsworth makes is that another reason Wilson can't identify, can't feel for the subject, is because the looking after children with learning difficulties in the class that Wilson comes from would be done by other people. Wordsworth said that children with learning difficulties would perhaps be boarded out. Whereas in the lower classes, to use Wordsworth's phrase, all children, whatever their abilities, would be looked after within the family, would be looked after in the community. And Wordsworth makes the point that there is a real strength of love. In fact, he said, it's in these communities, in these homes, that you see the strength, the disinterestedness, and the grandeur of love. So as I say, Wordsworth's letter reads much more like a manifesto of his beliefs, his radical beliefs, and it's from this that we really can get a picture of how radical Wordsworth was and his, what was called his new poetry. I invite you to look closely at the letter. Wordsworth's letter on the right here, you can see it's a draft of a letter. He goes to great lengths to get it right, and of course it would then be rewritten and sent, another copy sent to Wilson. But do take the opportunity to listen to the extracts and follow the words on the letter itself.